Well, again, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. My name is Bob Paniza. I'm the chair of the committee today. And joining me are our other members, Joan Pajunen and Beverly Webb. Also with us today is the Township Clerk, Crystal Porowski, and our legal counsel, John Pappas. We want to acknowledge that we are on lands traditionally occupied by Indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples have cared for this territory for the benefit of the future generations, and their stewardship throughout the ages is recognized. Today's meeting is being live streamed and recorded on the Township of Muskoka Lake website and on YouTube channel. By participating in the open public meeting today, you are consenting to your image, voice, and comments being recorded and posted online. We've been advised and provided with supplementary agenda material that came out to us as committee members last Friday. And I'd like to ask the members of our committee if there are any pecuniary interests.
None.
None. Thank you. The committee will now hear applications for a compliance audit being made. There are two applications. The first one, application CA number 001, registered third party, Friends of Muskoka, the applicant, Mr. Don Furniss. And the second one is CA 002, registered third party, Muskoka Lakes Association, applicant, Mr. Don Furniss. The procedures for the hearing will proceed as follows in accordance with the Muskoka Compliance Audit Committee's administrative procedures. The applicant will be introduced by the chair. The applicant or the applicant's agent will be provided an opportunity to speak to the application for a time not exceeding 15 minutes. Sorry. The registered third party or their agent will then be given an opportunity to speak to the application and comments received for time not exceeding 15 minutes. Committee may then ask questions of either the applicant or registered third party or their agents, and the committee will then consider the application and may do so privately as permitted under the Municipal Elections Act. And finally, the committee may share their decisions and reasons today or may adjourn to share their decisions at a later date prior to the 30-day deadline. We'll now hear the first application, CA number 001, Friends of Muskoka, and I open the floor to Mr. Don Furniss. Members, do we have any questions at this time?
How long were the flyers in the public domain prior to, I think, September 8th, when they were advised that they were in violation and had knowledge?
If I can make a suggestion, let's hear the submission from the associations, and I think that question would probably be answered at that time. I have no further questions. So at this time, I would ask representatives of the associations to come forward and respond to those issues raised by Mr. Furniss.
There you go, Susan.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair, Parisa, and committee members. My name is Susan Applicant. I am president of the Muskoka Lakes Association, and I appreciate this opportunity to respond to the questions raised in Mr. Furniss's application for a compliance audit of our third-party advertising expenses in last fall's election. Because Mr. Furniss has asked the same three questions of the MLA and Friends of Muskoka, the two corporations have submitted one binder of material. Mr. Ken Pierce, Director and Secretary of Friends of Muskoka, will be speaking to you on behalf of that corporation. Mr. Furniss is bringing this application under Section 88.35.1 of the Municipal Elections Act, which permits him to request an audit of our campaign finances if he has reasonable grounds to believe we contravene a section of the Act relating to campaign finances. A section of the Act appears on the first page of his application form under the heading Application by Elector. As we pointed out to you when Mr. Furniss brought a similar application following the 2018 election, his questions do not all relate to campaign finances. In particular, he questions the wording on our flyer. However, we are happy to address this question even though it's unrelated to our campaign finances, as we did in the last compliance audit hearing before you. The MLA is a not-for-profit corporation formed in 1894 and is Canada's oldest lake association. We are governed by an 18-member board of directors. Mr. Ken Pierce will be confirming to you that Friends of Muskoka is a not-for-profit corporation formed in 2017 to oppose a 4,000 unit development on Lake Rosso in the Manette area. Friends of Muskoka is governed by a 9-member board of directors. The MLA works with many different partners across Muskoka. We are a member of the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Association and work with smaller lake associations in Muskoka and across Ontario on issues that impact our members at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels. During the municipal election in October, the MLA worked with Friends of Muskoka and other lake associations to educate people about their right to vote at both their permanent and seasonal residences, which many people don't realize they can do. The MLA also wanted to be able to identify to our members the candidates we believed would best represent their interests on council, which is why we registered as a third-party advertiser. Friends of Muskoka did the same. Since the MLA and Friends were looking for candidates with the same positions on issues, such as protecting the environment and responsible taxation, we worked together to identify aligned candidates. Representatives of each of our corporations researched all the candidates, reviewed their positions on issues that are important to our members, and received board approval of the candidates we would support. We communicated these candidates on our website and on flyers handed out by our volunteers. The first reason in Mr. Furniss's application questions whether the proper information was included on the flyers distributed by the MLA and Friends of Muskoka. These flyers included the names of the candidates supported by our corporations, which means the flyers were third-party advertisements within the meaning of the Municipal Elections Act and were required to contain certain information about how to contact us. A copy of our initial flyer is at tab 1 in the binder we provided to you. Mr. Furniss's written application states that there was a requirement to include our mailing address, phone numbers, and email addresses on our flyer. However, Section 88.5 sub 1 sub 3 of the Municipal Action Act is at tab 2, and the words highlighted in gray state that only one of telephone number, mailing address, or email address must be included. If you look at the side of our initial flyer at tab 1 that has photos of the candidates, in the bottom right-hand corner, you will see that we included our election website address where people could go to find our contact information. We also included the last part of our email addresses, mla.on.ca and friendsofmuskoka.ca. Due to an oversight by one of our volunteers, we mistakenly dropped the info at before mla.on.ca and before friendsofmuskoka.ca. The clerk of the township emailed us about our flyers on September 8th, 2022. A copy of our email exchange with her is at tab 3. At the bottom of page 4 at tab 3, she states, in accordance with section 88.7, both the MLA and FOM must discontinue this advertising until it is in compliance with all third-party advertising requirements contained in the Municipal Elections Act. As soon as we received Clerk Tarasek's email, we immediately stopped distributing our flyers and amended the flyer that we had put on our websites. We put a sticker on every remaining flyer which added info at before our email addresses. We emailed Clerk Tarasek the next day to apologize, confirm we had stopped distributing the flyers, and sent her a copy of the flyer corrected with a sticker. Clerk Tarasek's email response to us is on the first page of tab 3, where she says, "Thank you very much for your prompt attention to this." A photocopy of the corrected flyer with the sticker is at tab 4. Please see the side of the flyer with photos of the candidates in the bottom right-hand corner. We've also included an actual flyer, one that we used in Gravenhurst, where we also registered as a third-party advertiser, to help show you what an actual flyer looked like. We would like to reinforce that our initial flyers did contain our website addresses where our contact information is set out. So although we mistakenly didn't set out our full email addresses, we were being transparent about who we are by providing our website address that included our contact information and a great deal of other information explaining our organizations. We have been asked by one of the members of the committee how many of the initial flyers or how long we had been distributing the flyers with the missing the info at. The answer to that is nominations closed on August 19th, 2022. We then did all of our review, interviewing candidates, getting our board meetings in place. And it took some time after nominations closed to have the flyers ready and printed. We started distributing them on September 2nd. When we received the notice from the clerk on September 8th, only a few hundred flyers had been distributed, and we distributed the corrected flyers over the next 6.5 weeks leading up to the election. Ultimately, several thousand corrected flyers with the stickers were distributed. Would you like me to proceed to the next point now? The second reason in Mr. Furniss's application questions the date of one of our invoices. In September 2022, the month before the election, we contacted one of our MLA members who is the president of a communications business. Her name is Linda Smith, and her company is Smithcom. We asked her advice on how to respond to false statements that were being made about us by some of the candidates who we were not supporting. As an aside, her advice was to not respond to the false statements, since our response would, in her words, give oxygen to them. So we were best to simply communicate our positions clearly. Ms. Smith did not want to be paid for her work, so did not send us an invoice. However, since her line of work is providing communications advice, the third-party advertising rules required us to include the value of her work as a campaign contribution. So when we were preparing our Form 8 after the election, we asked her to send us details of the value of her time. In response, she sent us an invoice dated January 30, 2023. A copy of her invoice can be found at tab 5. The description of services in her invoice was consulting advice during the Muskoka Lakes municipal election. You'll see that on her invoice. This makes it clear that she provided advice at the time of the election. Of course, since she was donating her time and did not want to be paid, an invoice was unnecessary, but it gave us details of the value of her time that she contributed, which we needed to prepare our Form 8. Ontario's third-party advertising election guide states that a registered third-party advertiser can only accept contributions or incur campaign expenses during their advertising campaign period, which runs from the time they register as a third-party advertiser until January 3, 2023. Please see the highlighted wording from page 10 of the guide at tab 6. The MLA and Friends of Muskoka each registered as third-party advertisers in the township on July 15, 2022. Since Ms. Smith donated her time to us in September 2022, we complied with the requirement to only accept contributions during our election advertising campaign period.
Sorry to interrupt. You just mentioned that she provided the advice in September 2023, 22.
Correct.
22?
Correct.
Okay, because I thought you said 23. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, 2022. The MLA disclosed Ms. Smith's contribution in Table 5 on page 6 of our Form 8. Please see tab 7. Mr. Pierce will confirm to you that Friends of Muskoka disclosed Ms. Smith's contribution in their Form 8 as well. The third reason in Mr. Furniss's application questions.
Sorry to interrupt you again. Just a point of clarification. The invoice then that is indicated here from Smithcom, was that paid for by the association?
It was a contribution of services, so it was like a donation.
Okay.
She wanted to donate her time. She didn't want us to pay her. So that's why initially she didn't send us an invoice. She just said, no, it's a donation. But we needed to know the value of that because of the rules. We were required to include it as a contribution in the Form 8. So that's why we said, please just let us know what was the value of your time. So she sent an invoice.
Okay, that's great. I just wanted to confirm whether there was an actual invoice but this is a contribution and the value of the contribution.
Right.
Thank you.
Shall I go on? Great. The third reason in Mr. Furniss's application questions whether the costs of designing our election flyer were all allocated to Friends of Muskoka or proportionally allocated between the MLA and Friends of Muskoka. The flyers were designed by a company called Watt International. A portion of its costs were paid for by the MLA and Friends of Muskoka, shared equally, and a portion of Watt's design costs were contributed by Watt to our campaign, and those were also divided equally. In fact, if you look at the two Form 8s, you will see the contribution portion is, which we've highlighted, it's on page 6 at tab 7 for the MLA. And you will see that the same highlighting in the Friends of Muskoka's Form 8 at tab 8 on page 6. And you will see that this contribution portion is divided equally $112.29. The amount that we paid Watt for their flyer design is buried within the line item brochures / flyers under the expense item. But there was equal sharing between the two corporations of Watt's costs.
Me?
Yes.
I have a question on page 6. There's a donation from Linda Smith. Build time, $84.75. Is this the same person, Smithcom?
It is. It is. Excuse me. Yes.
Thank you.
Welcome. We'd also like to point out that the MLA and Friends of Muskoka each incurred campaign expenses of less than half of their respective spending limits. Please see the clerk's certificate of maximum campaign expenses and the calculation at tab 9. The MLA incurred 42% of its permitted campaign expenses, and Friends of Muskoka incurred 47% of its permitted campaign expenses. And those are my comments, unless you have other questions.
Following up on Joan's question,
Mhm.
your contribution for Linda Smith is $84.75, which I assume the other organization did $84.75 as well. Where's the rest of the $330? Because the invoice was for $330, was it not?
The I'm just going to turn. Yeah, I
339. Sorry.
No, that's okay. No, that's a great question, and you will see that both Friends of Muskoka and the MLA disclosed Linda Smith's contribution of $84.75, but she also provided advice to us in the other municipalities where we were registered as a third-party advertiser. So we allocated the advice in the different municipalities. So a portion of her advice related to Township Muskoka Lakes, but a portion of it also related to other municipalities.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other further questions from the committee? Not at the moment. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Sorry, Ken Pierce for the Friends of Muskoka. Did you want to hear from Mr. Furniss on the MLA questions, or does he have further comments that we should be hearing first? That's, I guess, my question.
At the moment, we're just dealing with the application CA 001 Friends of Muskoka. So I'm assuming we've heard from both the applicant and the respondent on that. Is there any further information from you, Mr. Furniss, on that one? We have two applications before us. The first one was 001 Friends of Muskoka, which you have spoken on. Okay. You don't have any further information or input on that at this time? No. Okay. So now we'd like to proceed with application number 2 related to Muskoka Lakes Association. Did you already speak on that, Mr. Furniss, on that one? Okay. Alrighty. So now we would like to hear from. Yeah, I think it would be worthwhile having. I'm sorry. Are you speaking on the first application still?
Well, I guess there was some confusion. Susan Epplett is the president of the Muskoka Lakes Association, and she presented, and I'm going to adopt her comments, but I have a few sort of follow-up ones, but I just, we're sort of doing 2 at once here. So I wasn't sure procedurally whether you wanted to hear from Mr. Furniss on the MLA one and then we can do my presentation, which is only going to be a few minutes. So.
Okay, if you have any additional information you would like to provide or input with respect to the first application, by all means, you can speak now. We will then get into the second application, which you'll have an opportunity to speak after Mr. Furniss.
Okay, no, that's no problem. So Ken Pierce, I'm a director and the corporate secretary of the Friends of Muskoka. I do adopt Susan Eplett's comments from the MLA. The not-for-profit incorporation for the Friends of Muskoka, as Susan said, was in 2017. It was mainly to do with significant development here, and in particular Minette. The organization is incorporated under the Federal Not-for-Profit Corporations Act, the Canada Not-for-Profit Corporations Act. Just on the flyers, I think a question was when the flyers were first distributed. It was around September the 2nd. We were notified by the previous clerk to Ms. Proschi on September the 8th. We immediately stopped distributing, and by September the 9th, we had changed our websites, and we had also printed stickers. We were able to do that at the office, and we were put them on every flyer that was delivered after that. So there were a few hundred that went out without the that information, the info at, and by the September the 9th, we were putting stickers on, and thousands were delivered in the township of Muskoka Lakes with the correct stickers, and the flyers for Gravenhurst and any other flyers that we delivered. Again, thousands more were delivered with the correct information. Just so you have a sense, the show and tell is, this is what, it's actually a little bit smaller baggie, but we had the flyers here and we put them in a baggie, and we put a couple little rocks so that we threw it on the dock. It would sit there and not blow away and not get wet, so that when people were at the cottage, they could pick it up. You can see what Watt designed, vote to keep Muskoka, Muskoka, and the canoe. And then on the back was pictures of the candidates and their information, and a little bit of information about how to vote, because that's very important. A lot of people don't know that they can vote. And then at the bottom corner here was the contact information, and Susan talked enough about that. As far as the Linda Smith goes, we didn't need an invoice from her. We were never going to pay her anything. We did not pay her anything. She had requested that her time be considered a donation. Unfortunately, when we asked her, because we had to get a value for her services, she sent us an invoice, but it was not an invoice in the true sense of the word, because we were never going to pay it. She didn't want any money for it. We never gave her any cash. The number that you have, each organization, the 339, I think it was 8475. That was for us and for the MLA in the township of Muskoka Lakes, but we had some candidates say some things about us in Gravenhurst that we were concerned about. And so it was actually two of them. So if you do 8475 times 4, I think you come up with the 339 is my recollection of how it went down. So that's how that one was. The question from Mr. Furniss was, did the Muskoka Lakes Association also incur an amount for flyer design cost? And the answer was a resounding yes. And that was noted in the Form 8s. As Susan had mentioned, a part of it was as a contribution, and that was recorded, I think it was $112 and something, and each organization on their Form 8, and just to confirm, on the Friends of Muskoka Form 8, at tab 8, about the 5th or the 6th page, there's the table 6, and if you look across, it says Watt International, and there's a column description of the goods, and it says flyer design. It says $112.29. As Susan mentioned, the Watt component of it was around $300, and that shows up on the expenses page of the second page of the Form 8 under the major heading brochures and flyers. For the Friends of Muskoka, it was $1,597.48, and included in that was a component for the Watt flyer design costs, which we actually paid them as opposed to the contribution portion, which I just mentioned.
I'm sorry, can Can I just ask a question on that? What divide, what portion is her component? Is it in the binder? What tab?
Tab 8, it's a yellow tab. It's a little bit hard to read the number on it. It's the Friends of Muskoka Form 8.
And
The second page.
okay.
And if you go item under the heading is expenses, item 1, and about 3 lines down, it has inventory, advertising, brochures / flyers. The brochures / flyers is where that $300 is included. It's $1597.48. Part of that was printing costs and other costs, but one of the elements of that cost is the design costs for Watt, for designing the wonderful canoe and the boat to keep Muskoka.
Thank you.
And just to conclude on that part, the campaign expenses that were incurred by both organizations were around $2,000 each, well below the $5,000, or I think it was $5,800 limit. I think we have that at the tab at the very end as well. The very last page, it's $2,700 for the Friends of Muskoka, and the spending limit $58.55, so 47%. And for the MLA, it was $24.83, but the same spending limit, of course, of $58.55, so 42%. So we're, if the proportional and the equal and whatever, and you say, well, you should have put $100 across here to there. We did it on the best basis that we thought was appropriate, where we had actual costs. We did it based on actual amounts that were paid by each organization. And for printing, for example, we knew what the printing costs were. And we did this across 4 jurisdictions as well. So for the 4 jurisdictions, we were in Township of Muskoka Lakes, Town of Gravenhurst, Town of Bracebridge, and Township of Seguin. In some cases, we did it, the costs allocated 25% per municipality. In some cases, we did it based on membership, and the membership numbers for each organization are different in the different municipalities. But we did it, I can assure you, on a reasonable basis. And I think for most of these, it was done on an equal basis because we were able to figure it out and do it that way. But that's why, as you heard, the one was allocated between Gravenhurst and Muskoka Lakes, because that's where the question to Linda Smith, the same question came up in both of those municipalities. And then the last comment was, well, 2 comments actually. In a previous compliance audit, I think it was 2015, you were asked to go into all of the details for the expenses on that Form 8 and go sort of invoice by invoice and dollar by dollar, and you chose not to do that. And I think you told the applicant at that hearing that if they felt so inclined, that they might want to speak to the province and see if the legislation should be changed to provide that level of detail. But we provided what we believe was the required information, and we were, I think, trying to do the right thing for the value of the expenses for Ms. Smith, for example, because a lot of people have said she's volunteered her time. You don't need to do anything about it, because she was in the business of providing that kind of advice. We felt that we needed to get an amount from her to record as a contribution, which we did. Mr. Furniss audited us, had an application in 2019. Pretty much the same time, I think July of 2019. His applications then said, are these organizations entitled to be registered as third-party advertisers? He, I guess, looked at the Aird and Burles website, which said individuals can be registered, corporations can be, but this is an association, the Muskoka Lakes Association, and he went to the Aird and Burles website and it said associations cannot be. So we dutifully appeared before you last time and provided our articles of incorporation for both the Friends of Muskoka and the Muskoka Lakes Association and dealt with that issue. It goes on to say corporations carrying on business in Ontario. And of course, we had to address carrying on business as a not-for-profit. Businesses tend to operate for profit, and so we had to deal with that, which we did. Of course, there are many not-for-profits that carry on business, but they aren't allowed to distribute their profits to shareholders. They have to use it for their charitable purposes or not-for-profit purposes, which is very typical. And in Ontario, the Muskoka Lakes Association, as you heard, was incorporated in 1894 and has been a not-for-profit ever since. So clearly entitled to carry on business in Ontario. The Friends of Muskoka is a more recent incorporation, 2017. It's a federal incorporation, but as a federal company, not-for-profit company, it is entitled to carry on business in every province and territory in Canada without having to be extra provincially registered. And we went through that with you in 2019. We find ourselves here again today, happy to respond to the questions from Mr. Furniss. But the first question really relates to the campaign flyers, which, as Ms. Applicant noted, is not really something that is capable of being audited. And so I think we've addressed all of the questions that he has raised. Thank you. Any questions, please?
Any further questions from committee members?
Just a point, a clarification. It's on. Muskoka Lakes Association said about 100 flyers went out before the correction was made, and you said a few hundred. Is that?
It is several hundred. I think
between the two of you, it's several hundred.
It's several hundred. Yes, that is in fact correct.
All right, thank you.
Being no further questions, thank you for your presentation, Mr. Pierce. Members are ready to hear the second application. Mr. Furniss, please come forward for your input, please. Thank you.
I just say my flyer that I received has no correction on it. So regarding application C002, the Muskoka Lakes Association, again, I have three concerns. Number one is the MLA advertisement, which I gave you copies of what I have, violates section 88.5, subsection 1 of the Ontario Municipal Elections Act. The section states that no registered third party shall cause a third party advertisement to appear during the restricted period unless the advertisement contains the following information: the name of the registered third party, the municipality where the third party is registered, and 3, a telephone number, mailing address, or email address at which the third party may be contacted. So the MLA, the same as Friends, complies with parts 1 and 2, but it fails to comply with the third part of providing a phone number, a mailing address, or an email address as required by the Act. And the Act also has no provisions for QR codes or websites being alternatives. And I point out that this ad did appear in publications, and the one I saw in publication did not have any correction on it, indicating that those things had been addressed. So that is a violation of subsection 2 of section 88.5 of the Act. The second concern I have is the financial statements filed by the Muskoka Lakes Association. They should have been closed on December 31st, 2022, with the exception of the bank expenses, as the Act allows for under section 88.29. However, the statement includes an election billed time of $87.75 on January 30th, 2023 for Linda Smith. And this violates the Ontario Municipal Elections Act, as to my knowledge, no supplementary filing was filed with a request for an extension in time. And the third point is similar to my concerns with regards to the The Friends is that flyer design for the MLA. There is no design artwork expense as there is in the Friends. And recollecting the decision of this committee back in 2015 of requesting audits for a candidate who had a website and 4 candidates who had bios in that website, requesting 5 audits of those 5 candidates. This certainly is a much lower threshold where there's a definite benefit to the Muskoka Lakes Association from the artwork on this design of this flyer or advertisement. So I conclude that based on your past practice, this certainly meets the criteria for an audit. Any questions, committee?
Members of the committee, any questions?
I have a question. You talk about the design expense, and you mentioned in your first presentation that there was $351.15.
That's correct.
Can you point me to where that is?
That should be near the end of the Friends financial filings where they list the contributions. It should be right at the very top of that list.
Oh, in the Friends.
I have a copy of it here if you'd like to see it.
Can I see his copy?
Would you like to see it?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Because I'm having trouble locating that. Oh, it's in the attack. Okay, I see.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, thank you. In the attack. Thank you.
Okay, set up.
Thank you, Mr. Furniss.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would this time ask if you'd like to come forward and respond to that and other issues brought forward at this time.
So it's interesting that question, that presentation was in relation to the Muskoka Lakes Association, but the answer to that question is coming from the Friends of Muskoka because he's referring to the Friends of Muskoka Form 8. So I will address that question, but then I will defer to Susan Epplett to do her. I don't think she's going to do her presentation again. I don't think that's necessary. So if you go to the Form 8 for the Friends of Muskoka, that's tab 9. The yellow tab, it's a little bit hard to read. The very last page, I think Mr. Furniss was pointing out the top line says Lori Thompson, flyer design, $351.15. So this is the contribution section. And one of the Friends of Muskoka members, Lori Thompson, contributed to the campaign expense or the election expenses incurred by the Friends of Muskoka in relation to the flyer design, $351. The fact that the MLA does not have perhaps a corresponding number is because Lori Thompson did not contribute to the MLA campaign in that same manner. But I can assure you that when you go to the second page that I talked about before, and again, that's the section entitled expenses about halfway down the page. And the third line item is brochures/flyers. And the amount there is $1597.48. And it's a similar number, not the same, but it's a very similar number because of differences between jurisdictions, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's about $1,300 or $1,400 for the MLA, but I'm speaking to the Friends, and the Friends, it's $1,597. That $351 for design costs is included within that $1,597. And as I said before, the other elements to that include flyer printing costs, and in fact, we incurred some costs for the stickers and other ancillary costs to make up that $1,597. So that's the answer to that question. Susan can expand on that if necessary for the MLA and point out the MLA's Form 8, but the same second page, you'll find that number in there. So yeah, it's $1,346.73. But that's the explanation why it's in the contributions part of one organization where we had a member contribute, where that same contribution was not made for the other one. Thank you. Susan, I guess it's over to you. If there are any questions or clarifications on that.
Any questions, members?
I have a question, but you spoke to it, but it's probably related to the Muskoka Lakes. I'm confused now whether Lori Thompson donated that or you paid her that, because I think where it's in table 5, that's the detail for table 5, seems to imply that it was a contribution. So one of you can answer that.
Yeah, she paid that cost when the invoice came in from Watt. She paid it on behalf of the Friends of Muskoka as a contribution. So I guess you could look at it as a cash contribution from her, and it was used to pay that particular invoice. That it was sort of, that's what she wanted to be dedicated towards. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay.
But it didn't also show up in your brochure flyer expense as well, did you? Because you've implied that the cost of the brochures showed up in your brochure flyers expense.
That $300 showed up in the flyer brochures line item, the $1,500.
Is it an expense as well?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Pierce, sorry.
Go ahead.
You have this example of your distribution method to cottagers, docks around the lakes, and that. So is that distributed by a company?
No, those are volunteers. I in fact delivered many hundreds of them, and we had people on paddle boards and kayaks and whatever, and they were purely volunteers. I mean, Linda Smith was a volunteer, but because her advice was related to her business, what she does, we had to include her value of her contribution in the thing. But the regular volunteers, no. We did do a lot door to door as well in various municipalities, including the township of Muskoka Lakes. There was door to door where people knocked on doors or left them between doors. But of course, when you've got a lot of islands in the township of Muskoka Lakes, there are no mailboxes. And of course, we're not allowed to put them in mailboxes. That's Canada Post. That would be illegal. So we can't do that. But we would put them between doors or on porches, hand delivered. And the other way to get to island cottagers, about the only way to do it is to literally toss it on their dock.
So there is no cost associated with the delivery?
No, none whatsoever.
I need some clarification, Mr. Pierce. You mentioned just recently that the 339, it was my understanding, was a contribution. It was not an invoice. Is that correct?
No, it was invoiced by Watt. Watt did two things. Watt said, we're going to bill you for part of our time, but we're also going to do a contribution for part of our time. And the contribution part is the $112.29 or whatever the number is. And the 300 and whatever number that you just said was they did invoice us for, and we allocated it between the organizations. And in the case of the Friends of Muskoka, one of our members, Lori Thompson, said, I will do a contribution to the Friends of Muskoka for that amount and will help to pay that invoice.
But you mentioned that part of those costs, part of the 339 is included in the brochures and flyers state
Correct.
report?
Can I speak up here? I think we're referring to the 339 from Smith. And
Yeah.
you're still talking about the Watt expense. Is that correct? Yeah, it's
That's right.
300, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's asking about Linda Smith.
I'm asking about Smithcom or.
Oh, okay. Do you want to answer that one? Where the,
They were all included as expenses. Linda Smith is not in fires. She's in, fire.
yeah, this is our treasurer, Janet Griffin from the Friends of Muskoka. So just so that you're aware, she's more familiar with the numbers than I am. So,
Okay, thank you.
So, yes. She's in salaries, benefits, honoraria, professional fees until voting day, and then the Canada Post. Yeah, I think she's in. Yeah, in that, because it was you expense the contribution in the same way. You receive the value of $339 and you have to expense it. So it's de facto a cost, because that's the only way that the year amounts balance.
But again, the question I have is that 339 was considered a contribution?
Yes.
It was. And
So we receive the contribution and we expense the value of it.
okay, and that's in the brochures flyer component of 1597?
no, I think she's saying it's in the lower down, the about 5 lines down, salaries, honoraria.
Salary, okay,
Professional fees.
665. Great, thank you.
And it's 8475 for our 8475 for our organization. It's not the 339. It's divided between Gravenhurst and TML, and then 50% between the two organizations. So that's why we have 8475. That would be included in that.
Members, further questions?
Oh,
Oh, go ahead. So the Watts International on page 6 of 8, tab 8 for 11229. Paid or contribution?
that's a contribution. Nothing was ever paid.
Thank you.
And just clarification, the $339 invoice, was that paid?
No, that was never paid either.
But you put it through as an expense.
Right. And as a contribution, as we're required to do.
Okay. Thank you.
It's top and bottom, right? So next as well.
Any further questions of committee members? Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else from the association that wishes to speak on that?
Just for the record, Susan Epplett, I'm president of the Muskoka Lakes Association. I have exactly the same comments, so I'll save you the time of repeating them because my comments apply to both of these applications. If there's anything else though that you're wondering about, very happy to expand on it. If it helps, so Linda Smithcon invoice, that was to cover advice in 2 municipalities, Gravenhurst and Township, and Muskoka Lakes. So we took her 339, divided it in half, 1 for each, and then shared it equally between the 2 corporations. And that is reflected as a contribution and then an expense, as we're required to do when we complete the form.
Any questions from committee members?
Now, perhaps I missed it, but was there a reason for the late filing?
By Linda Smith, by the date on her invoice? Yes. So the reason is she did the work in September of 2022 during the election because we needed her help how to respond to these false statements that were being made against us. So we approached her in September 2022. And when we were preparing our Form 8 in the early, after the election, so probably in early January, we sat down and said, okay, the Form 8s are due end of March. So we started going through all of the contributions, the expenses, et cetera, pulling together all the numbers. And we said, you know, Linda Smith gave us some advice. We are required to include the value of her advice because she's a professional. And so we called her up and said, what would you say the value of your advice was? And she said, I want to donate it. Don't pay me. We said, that's okay. We're not going to pay you, but because you're a professional, we have to show it as a contribution. She said, oh, fine. So she sent us a piece of paper, but her piece of paper said invoice on it. Really, it could have been an email, but she did it in a more official way. So she sent us this invoice and said, now don't pay it, but that'll show you what the value is. And she sent that to us at the end of January when we were pulling together our Form 8 filing. That makes sense?
Yes.
Are there any further questions from committee members? Before we adjourn, I'd like to give an opportunity to anyone else to rebuttal on any of the material. Mr. Furniss, I believe you have further comments.
I just point out that this advertisement is a joint effort of the Friends and Muskoka Lakes Association. I think it's unfair to assign all of the development cost of this to just one of the organizations. It should be allocated as it was for the rocks and the plastic bags to both organizations. So it was very nice of Ms. Thompson to provide the service, but I really think that if Muskoka Lakes Association was going to put a flyer out, they would have to pay for the development work of that flyer, and therefore it should be allocated between them.
Mr. Furniss, can I ask one question? You said you got a flyer that didn't have the change on it. When did you get your flyer?
It was dropped off on my dock, and I'm going to say it was sometime in August.
Okay, thank you.
Just a point of clarification, you indicated it was sometime in August?
Yes, it was in August. I can't tell you the exact date. It was a weekend in August, and my guess is that it was probably mid-August.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments from the associations?
I would just point out that the candidates campaign period, the nominations period closed August 19th. And it took us, as Susan Eplett said, a few weeks to actually decide on which candidates we felt were most aligned with our views of the world. And it wasn't until much later, beginning of September, that the flyers were actually printed. And as we said, we know that we started distributing them on September the 2nd. And just in response to the flyer design costs, as we said, the flyer design costs were allocated between the two organizations, irrespective of whether one member of one organization contributed something towards the costs of that. And that's readily apparent when you see the design costs that the Watt contributed was in line items on both of ours. I mean, it's buried, the total amount is buried in the expenses line for flyers and brochures, but you can see that the $112.29 contribution towards it was allocated, it showed up on both organizations' Form 8s. And in fact, the flyer design costs contribution that was paid to Watt that a member of the Friends of Muskoka donated shows up in the contribution section as well. So I can assure you that both organizations paid for Watt's services for flyer design.
I think those are the only comments that we will take. Mr. Furniss, you've had your opportunity to speak. We've had the rebuttals from both members. Any further questions of members of committee? Not at this moment. We have a number of issues that we obviously have to deal with now. What I would suggest, if depending on members of the committee, that we recess for approximately 2 hours, that we would come back at 1 o'clock, at which time we will either render decisions or we will postpone the meeting until a further date. So we will gather here again at 1 o'clock. So the motion before us, and we would need a mover and a seconder. All righty. Be it resolved, the Muskoka Compliance Committee convene in private at 11:05 to deliberate the compliance audit applications of the Friends of Muskoka and Lakes Association pursuant to 8833 of the Municipal Elections Act. All in favor?
Second.
Okay, that's carried. So we'll see you back here at 1 o'clock for those that wish to return.